So I'm hearing high grade, and really, you guys are a polymetallic company. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right?
Yeah, so silver is the highest value metal, followed by zinc, and then lead and copper are about the same
Okay.
in the 43101 compliant resources.
So really, the plan is to get that, for lack of a better word, cleaned up and get that mined and processed, and then we're going into exploration, which is really what's the biggest differentiator now with what you have. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the idea is to commission the recycling project, get cash flow going from that. Also show the community that we're good owners, right? Get people employed in the project and so on. In the meantime, we will be appraising what's in the hard rock project, and there are two aspects to that. One is the remaining mineralization in the reef, which was the old host that was mined, and the second is copper exploration in the footwall.
Julian Vickers, NorthMin. How are you? Good afternoon to you, my friend.
Yeah, very well, Andy. Thank you very much. Pleasure to
Uh,
be here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming on board. Just to all my viewers and listeners, NorthMin is a new sponsor of ours. As of right now, full disclosure, I am not an investor that can and more than likely will change. Perhaps when this drops or during the course of the next few to several weeks. Just full disclosure to all of you out there. Julian, what was really interesting to me and compelling to me, actually, and I think it's a big story. You're doing all this in the Republic of Ireland, and I am not familiar with that jurisdiction, number one. And number two, I think you have quite the competitive advantage with a lot of other mining companies that I work with, is that you're in the Republic of Ireland and you have access to ore or a project there. And then, but yeah, work that out with for me and tell me about it.
Yeah, sure. So the Republic of Ireland it certainly was the largest zinc producer in Europe, and it may still be. There's a very large mine operated by Boliden called Tara, probably 120 millions produced and still in the ground, and it still is a very active mining area. Though historical mines include Tynagh, which is our project, silver mines, Lachine, Galmoy. And then there is a new discovery at Ballywire, which Group 11 Resources are successfully exploring, and they're listed on the TSX as well. And then Glencore has a 50 million ton pre-development project. So there is a lot of mining activity. The reason it's so great, and I think we have a competitive advantage, is that the mining law in Ireland is very conducive to exploration. You're able to pick up ground very efficiently, and you can pick up significant areas of ground, so you can actually do proper exploration. And secondly, there is a well-trodden path, right, in terms of permitting. And the final thing is that the infrastructure is really good. So generally, the infrastructure is good in terms of roads and power and so on. For our projects in particular, given it's a brownfield site, we already have power, water, road access, strengthened bridges. So we don't have any of the usual civil engineering expenses that you find with normal mining projects.
So it's not like you're in the middle of, let's say, Alaska or northern Canada with nothing around you, or Africa or Latin America for that reason. You're really right on the fairway when it comes to infrastructure. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And I'll give you, for example, right, there's already a concrete pad where we are planning to put the plan for the recycling project. So it doesn't come much better than that.
Okay, fantastic. Tell me a little bit, and then I want to get into what you got or what you have or think you have. But tell me a little bit about the jurisdiction of Ireland. One of the um, challenges that a lot of mining companies have, as well as that I have in evaluating a new company, is the permitting process. There's just simply jurisdictions I won't touch, and there are
Yeah.
jurisdictions that I want to see where the company is at. I like either in the beginning or at the end because permitting can take anywhere from 5 to 10 plus years, just depending on the project. Is Ireland? Yeah, tell me about the permitting in Ireland and how that's competitive to you guys.
Yeah, no, sure. So the permitting process in Ireland is there are two sequential steps. The first is the application to, in our case, Galway County Council. So we'll ask them for planning approval to develop the initially the recycling project. So that's the project which will be permitted first, and I'll come back to that because it's relevant. And then once planning approval has been given, then you go for EPA approval, which is essentially waste and environmental permit. Once you've got both of those, there is a requirement for a mining permit from the state, but that's procedural, and then you can develop the project. So the timeline to go through those steps is around 2 years.
2 years to mine, is that correct? If assuming everything goes accordingly.
We're assuming 2.5 years because we're assuming there'll be 6 months of backward and forward on the process. So I would say conservatively, within 3 years we'll be constructing the project.
Wow, fantastic!
So and then it's about probably less than 1 year build. So you're thinking about production in 4 years from now. Now the reason that sounds aggressive, but the reason is that the initial project, we call it the surface project. So the resources are at the surface. They are contained in the tailings from the prior operation and the waste stockpile. So we have 4 million tons of high-grade resources in the tailings ponds, which are 43-101 compliant, 2.7 million tons of low-grade, and we think that we can add around 1 million tons of high-grade from the waste stockpile to get us to 5. Now, in order to develop that, we don't need to draw down the water table. We don't need to do any dewatering. It's a great fit to the government's vision of a circular economy in terms of waste recycling. And we're also producing 2 critical minerals for the EU. One, copper. There is not a huge grade of copper in the tailings, but significant in terms of metal and value. But there's also a lot of barytes. So with the metals, there's about 30% barytes. So that translates into about 1 million tons of barytes. And for the EU, barytes is a critical mineral because the supply currently is from China. So we're expecting that we're going to tick a lot of boxes. And then the final box, obviously, is the benefit to the community in that we'll be cleaning up a contaminated site. We'll be dramatically reducing the amount of metals, and then we'll be resealing the tailings to modern standards, right? So there's a lot to like about the project, which is why we expect it to be relatively efficient.
Got it. Okay, so just to really comment more, I wish more mining companies would actually do that, meaning look at the tailings first so they can get to mining and get to cash flow, and then do some exploration, which we'll get to in a minute with you. But that's really your model. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is. There is a very good reason for that though, and that is that the original ore that was mined from the Tynagh open pit was very high grade. So it ran like 16% combined lead and zinc, for example, with high silver credits and copper and some copper credits. The problem with it was metallurgically difficult. So when they put it through a standard flotation circuit back in the 60s, they got very poor recoveries. And that meant that a lot of the material went out onto the dam. So the dams run, the resource, high-grade resource grade is 6% combined, lead, zinc, 1.5 ounces of silver. There's some areas that are 8.5. If you remove the barytes, you get an upgrade to 8.5. And the waste stockpile panel sampling is about 5.5, right? So it's all kind of similar. And for comparison, that's actually similar to the grade that's been mined underground at Tara. So most tailings projects, you're thinking about a fraction of that grade, like maybe up, right? Yep. So the Tynagh project is different because of that.
Got it. Okay, so I'm hearing high grade, and really, you guys are a polymetallic company. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right?
Yeah, so silver is the highest value metal, followed by zinc, and then lead and copper are about the same
Okay.
in the 43101 compliant resources.
So really, the plan is to get that, for lack of a better word, cleaned up and get that mined and processed, and then we're going into exploration, which is really what's the biggest differentiator now with what you have. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the idea is to commission the recycling project, get cash flow going from that. Also show the community that we're good owners, right? Get people employed in the project and so on. In the meantime, we will be appraising what's in the hard rock project, and there are two aspects to that. One is the remaining mineralization in the reef, which was the old host that was mined, and the second is copper exploration in the footwall. Now, a bit of color on that. So the Tynagh hard rock is very shallow. So the hard rock mineralization starts at about 40 meters in zone 3, and the maximum depth is around 200 meters for the reef hosted ores. So we're talking about very shallow depths. The previous operator mined the ore bodies underground. So essentially they took the eyes out of them. And there are reasons for that. They discovered Tara, for example, and needed to maximize cash flow at Tara. So they needed cash flow up front. The second issue was that in the right side of the right half of each of the two ore zones has quite a bit of copper in it. And they stayed away from that, which sounds really counterintuitive, but there are good reasons. One is that copper prices were very low at the time. And secondly, it was causing metallurgical problems. Okay, so they weren't set up to process that ore.
Yep.
So our working assumption is that they left quite a bit of ore in the ground on the east side of the two zones. And they also left a halo of lower grade ore around the high grade ore that was mined. And we think that halo will be quite a bit more than was extracted. Because the strange thing about Tynagh is, thicknesses of mineralization are 40, 50 meters, right? So it's like, bulk grades. And we think they mined a small part of that. So that's what I would call the low risk part of the hard rock project. The bit that we are doing what you call more exploration around is chasing the copper. So Tynagh
That's what I'm getting at. That's what's appealing, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, so Tynagh is known and recognized as one of the richest copper systems in Ireland. But when the previous operator was operating it, they had a loss-making copper mine at Gortdrum, also in the Irish Republic. Okay, so you can see in the annual reports that they were funding that, and it was hurting. Okay, so when they encountered copper at Tynagh, it really wasn't very interesting. Right. Which is crazy, right? But actually, that was the case. So they didn't chase after the copper in the reef, right? They also didn't chase after the copper that was intersection drilling up against the Tynagh Fault. So when we looked at that, we could see copper mineralization over most of the 1,400 meters of strike on the Tynagh Fault, but it really wasn't chased, and the intersections were very good, right? So in the footwall, the average intercept was around 10 meters at 3%. So, really nice stuff. And they talked for several years about going back to explore for another footwall ore body, but they never did it. Yeah. So they just moved on, right? And as I said, there are good corporate reasons why they did that, but it means that there's a great opportunity for us to define the reef hosted copper and the copper that's up against the fault, and then chase it down plunge in the plane of the Tynagh Fault. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Also, why they didn't do it, but what's really exciting for me is that what you just said about you have this opportunity to chase copper. Tell me what you can share. What you can share. What do you think you got, and what are you chasing for copper?
Yeah, okay. So it's hard to define, right? But I'll give you some
It's almost
examples.
like an
So
early exploration for copper, but yet in a brownfield opportunity. Is
yeah.
that correct?
So let's say so there are two hard rock ore zones, zone 2 and zone 3. The best data is zone 3. Okay. So we were able to take the zone 3 data and do a block model. And that block model, it's not 43101 compliant, right? Just for clarity. But that block model suggested an inventory of about 5.2 million tons in zone 3. We know they only mine 1.2, 1.25 actually, right? So implication being there's around 4 million tons left in the ground.
There's a lot of copper still.
This is polymetallic, right?
Got
The
it.
east
Okay.
side, the east side is copper rich. Okay, so we just think, well, let's see how many tons of it's copper rich, and that's what this drilling program is all about. But we're pretty sure that mineralization is there. And historically, zone 2 was twice the size of zone 3, right? Which is why we kind of, when people ask, we think, well, look, there could be 10 to 15 million tons of polymetallic ore remaining. Now, on the copper zone, what we're finding is that the footwall doesn't seem to be only mineralized with copper. It seems to be copper up against the fault, but as we drill down through the footwall argillaceous pyroclastic limestones, we're finding they're actually mineralized with base metals as well. Right,
Oh.
so there does seem to be another zone, right? And I think it's to do with the fact that Tynagh must be in a very long-lived system. So you've had fluids coming through for a long period of time. So and then down at about 400 meters, there is a slightly cleaner limestone unit called the Lower Limestone Shales. That is the host to the old Gortdrum mine. Okay, do you remember I said they had a loss-making mine, right? So the idea is that these are the root zones to reef-hosted polymetallic ores. Okay, so at Tynagh, that horizon has not been explored underneath the mine. And we know that it hosts mineralization elsewhere on the block. Okay, and then when we look at the copper mineralogy, we're seeing the same mineralogy as we see at Gortdrum. So we see some gray coppers in the reef. We see chalcopyrite with a bit more depth. We got bornite coming in the historical drilling in the structure, but there's no chalcozite, right? Now at Gortdrum, you've got exactly the same sequence, but you've got chalcozite being the main ore mineral. So it may well be that the chalcozite zone is below us. So we're quite excited about that target, and we call it the Gortdrum Analogue target. And there's room for about 10 million tons.
Nice.
43, not 43.1 compliant, but if you take the 1,400 meters and you take the dimensions of the Gortdrum ore body, you can fit 10 million tons in there.
Now we're talking.
Yeah. So we're going to chase it down plunge and work towards that. We're not going to do a Hail Mary and go for deep holes. We're going to be systematic and sensible. But, there's so far, so good. And the analog, most recent analog to this is what they're doing at Ballywire. So if you look at the copper silver they're drilling in the footwall of the reef, it's in exactly the same host rocks. So it's up against the structures in these lower limestone shales. So the Irish model, shall we call it, seems to be hanging together, quite nicely in different deposits.
Okay, so let me ask some critical questions here that I have just with what all you have said. So let's assume let's assume here that you think what you have, and let's assume you think you have more that this is a viable copper mine or a polymetallic mine. Where are you going to get this processed? Do you have the processing facilities, or do you have to ship that somewhere else? Do you have to ship that to the US or to the EU, or tell me about that.
So there's a lot of optionality actually. So if you look at the Gary Lawn redevelopment, which is going into production now, that's actually the reopening of the Galway mine. And what they're doing is they're using ore sorters to upgrade ore to about 26% lead zinc, and then they're shipping that to Poland. So they don't have a concentrator.
Okay.
Now in our case, right?
That's still relatively close. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I have family in Europe, and it's not. And it's also relatively cheap. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So you can definitely do that. In our case, the first project that will be commissioned is the surface project, though, and we will have. We're in the process of testing a. We've got a base flow sheet which we put in the 43101. That's great for base metals. Okay for silver.
Okay.
What we're doing is we're testing another flow sheet which is great for base metals and great for silver. Which
Okay.
that
Use that one.
is actually, very relevant, right?
Yeah.
So, and that will now enable us to produce metals.
Okay.
So
there's a plan. There's a plan.
Yeah, there's a plan. Right? There's a plan, and what we'll do is we'll build. I'm getting way ahead of my skis here, but
yeah, it's okay.
The idea is to build 2 trains for the recycling project. Run tailings through both and waste rock, and then flip one of them into processing hard rock mineralization, which has already been pre-concentrated either by flotation or by ore sorting.
Got it.
So we're trying to capture as much of the metal value as we can in the Republic.
Yeah, I understand. That's jobs, right?
Yeah, it's jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the next question really I have is, can you, or are you comfortable with giving an ETA on when you'll be cash flowing?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, provided
2
the
years,
permitting,
2.5 years.
I would provide the permitting schedule is, as I said, it'll be 3.5 to 4 years.
3.5 to 4 years, not 5 years or 10 years. Oh, correct.
No, it's not. And the other thing to bear in mind,
that's a really good point, big point, and I just really want to make sure I got the right information.
No, say 4 years, and a bigger point is it won't take us that much to get there, right? So where projects always kind of come unstuck from a shareholder perspective is the amount of dilution it requires to get to cash flow.
Okay, so I'm going to go there. I want to go there. You're right. Exactly. Let me ask that. What's your share structure, and how much cash do you have? Really, are you fully funded for the drilling? And really, what's the funding looking like to take this to production cleanup and then to get what you want?
Yeah. So we have about 53 million shares issued.
Wow, you guys are really tight.
And yes, and
who's that held by? I'm interrupting you, but I'm very interested. Who's that held by? That you can name.
Yeah, so I'll get a big picture. It's about 57% my family, right? So founders, and then the new shares.
Good. Go ahead.
The new shares. We issued $3 million of new shares, and there are 3 institutions in there which came in. And the balance, so more than half, is in the hands of mining executives who are friends and colleagues and clients, right? So who I know very well and have trusted us with their money. So I'd say it's a quite sticky structure, relatively speaking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me about cash. What do you got in the bank?
Yeah. So we. Just to finish off, so we're 65 million fully diluted, right?
Got it.
Bit, yeah. We raised 3, we spent 1, so we're at about 2 million in the bank now. So we're fully funded for this initial 10-hole program, plus the metallurgical test work on the surface project, and probably getting some of that. Let me back up. One of the resources is inferred. We're going to convert some of that to indicated, the others indicated. And we'll also start to put some numbers around the surface project. So we're fully funded for that program. Okay.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. Tell me about news. What do you have anything that's coming out that you can talk about, and what should investors be paying attention to over the next? Well, really walk me through the end of the quarter and perhaps the end of the year that you can talk about. What are you going to be releasing so investors should be paying attention?
Yeah. So we released 2 holes so far of the 10-hole program. But we put out a release this morning just updating the market that we have drilled another 2 holes. So those are currently being cut and sent for assay. The assay
What's the ETA? Yeah, what's the ETA on that?
normally 2 to 3 weeks.
That's it.
So it's very fast.
Very fast.
So the lab is actually in a town called Loughrea, which is very close to us. So we have great infrastructure.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're right on the fairway. It's all right there.
I'll give you another so what, right? So the driller's yard is on our license.
Great.
So anyway, that'll be 2 to 3 weeks for assays from those 2 holes. We're drilling hole 5 at the moment, and we'll just be continuing to drill from here on. So you'll have steady news coming through from there. We expect news on the metallurgical test work to be ready, probably with some numbers. It may not be full PEA, but there'll be enough for people to start doing sums, and that'll probably be early September, I would think.
So news is really going to be flowing.
No, it really will be flowing. Yeah, we expect to be able to put out some news around other licenses which we are seeking to acquire, which have existing resources on them. So that'll be quite impactful for the company's resource base. And then finally, we are hoping to put out news around consolidation of the land. And once we've done that, we'll have everything that we need to develop the surface project.